Okay, I think we'll go ahead and get started. Good afternoon. My name is Crystal Brown. I'm the Chief Communications Officer here at the university. I'd like to welcome you to today's conversation on protecting your identity theft. I also have the pleasure this afternoon of introducing Dr. Ann Wiley. She is our Interim Vice President of Information Technology and Chief Information Officer. Dr. Wiley.
Thank you, Crystal. I thought before we began, and I would just update you briefly on the activities of the task force that the President appointed after our breach. This was a very alarming event that happened at the university, and we have put together a group of people from across the university. It has students, staff, and faculty to try to take a hard look at what we do to protect our sensitive information and how we function in the area generally of cybersecurity. The task force has been working very hard. We have 4 groups. One group is looking throughout the university for places where sensitive information is stored, and we are currently trying to gather that information. Another group is looking at policies that we have, that the system has, that other institutions have, to see if there are policy changes that we should make to help improve our cybersecurity. Another group is looking at additional actions we could take, systems we can put in place that would also enhance our security of personal information and sensitive data. And the last group has contracted with an outside organization to attempt to hack our systems. So they are in the process of doing that right now. We're trying to find out if there are security weaknesses that we have. So the task force will complete its work by the middle of June. Several of our groups are really coming quite close to the end of their tasks, and I believe that out of this group will come a series of recommendations. But one thing that I've learned in studying this issue over the last several months is that there really is no way that an institution can absolutely guarantee the security of our data always. We can do everything we can. We can take steps certainly to improve our security, but there are people that are smarter than we are, dedicated to the stealing of information, and there are also human error. And these kinds of things mean that we as individuals must be extremely careful about our own personal data. And for that reason, we are extremely pleased to have Mr. Jeff Karberg here with us today. He's the Associate Attorney for the Consumer Protection Division, and he is the Administrator of the Identity Theft Program in the Office of the Maryland Attorney General. He's a real expert on this topic, and I know you will benefit from his comments. They should last about 45 minutes or so, and at the end of that time, Mr. Karberg says that he would be happy to take questions. So with that, thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Jeff Karberg, and before I get started, I just want to talk for a moment about some of the handouts you may have picked up. The first one is a short letter, sort of a checklist if you're a victim of identity theft. It contains a lot of helpful phone numbers, addresses, websites, that sort of thing. So if you're worried about taking notes or if I'm moving a little too quickly on some of the slides, please reference this, and you can keep it and make sure you've got it all down accurately. It also has my contact information as well as the contact information for the Attorney General's office. So keep that in mind. The second thing I'd like to bring your attention to is this wonderful book put out by the Federal Trade Commission. It handles identity theft in depth. It breaks down identity theft into several discrete categories. So if it ever happens to you, you can get detailed information on perhaps just your situation. It also contains helpful sample letters and sample information. As well as a form that you can fill out to help get your free credit reports. So keep that in mind as you pick these up. So today I'm going to talk to you about identity theft. I'm going to tell you what it is, how to protect yourself from it, how to tell if you're a victim, how to recover from identity theft, and I'll talk about some additional resources should you ever be a victim of identity theft. So what is identity theft? Broadly speaking, it's when someone uses your information, your credentials, to obtain goods and services without your permission. It's one of the fastest growing crimes in the country, and it's getting bigger and bigger every year, especially now with how prevalent computer hackings are, or data mining and that sort of thing. And I can tell you from my experience that victims spend a lot of time putting back their credit histories and putting their lives back together. So it's really worth paying attention to on how to prevent it or how to recover from it. So there's something called financial identity theft. And that's when identity thieves use your personal information to steal money or also goods. There's something called existing account fraud, and that's where an identity thief compromises an existing account. A good example of this is the Target. Does everyone remember the Target security breach in December? It affected a lot of people. Identity thieves were able to obtain the information for millions and millions of Target cards and credit cards, and perhaps abuse that information. Then there's something else called new account fraud, and that's where identity thieves use your personal information to establish or create new accounts. And that's where a scenario of that is where identity thieves steal your name, social security number, maybe tax number, other information, and go out and establish new accounts, such as a credit card or a bank loan or a home mortgage even. There's also government document fraud, which is very common. It's where someone uses your name or photograph or something to obtain a fraudulent driver's license or social security card, or even your social security benefits. And of course, people are often using fraudulent social security numbers or other identification means to obtain jobs or apartment rentals in your name. So there's another category of identity theft called medical identity theft. And this is, broadly speaking, where someone obtains medical care or treatment using your credentials or information. Now, I'm sure that you all can understand why this is particularly dangerous. There can be actual physical consequences to this type of identity theft. For example, if the doctor thinks he is treating one person, but really there are two people combining and mixing medical records, it can lead to terrible reactions or contraindicated medications. It could also lead to more serious things like being denied certain procedures or treatment. Criminal identity theft can also have very serious real-world effects. For example, this often happens a lot within families, cousins or brothers who may be close in age. If one brother gets pulled over for maybe drunk driving one too many times and decides he doesn't want to get in trouble for it again, they often pass off or give the name or perhaps other information of his brother, so he hopefully gets out of a ticket. It very rarely works, and it only ends up in two brothers now being dragged through the legal system. So, how does identity theft happen? This is what I talk about. When I talk about this, I call this sort of the old-fashioned way. Simply stealing your wallet, stealing your purse, stealing your mail, and you can do that by just simply taking the mail out of the mailbox, or a slightly more sophisticated operation of doing a change of address. That's going to the post office and actually filling out the paperwork to have all mail routed to a new address. Dumpster diving. This is when identity thieves simply go through the trash or the garbage to look for vital pieces of information. A lot of folks don't realize that if you throw away maybe a bank statement, a medical bill, and some other information, if you piece them together, it can create a complete picture of someone's identity. The other serious threat of dumpster diving is when a business, perhaps a doctor's office, goes out of business, and the landlord or somebody just simply dumps boxes and boxes of important records in the dumpster behind. allowing anyone who walks by to pick up hundreds or thousands of identities to abuse at will. Of course, this is a newer phenomenon, but stealing files from businesses by hacking into the data network. This is becoming more and more common. Every day on the news, there's a new institution or a new business that's announcing some jaw-dropping number of records that have been compromised, so this is one to look out for. Identity thieves can also obtain information through fraudulent means. That is, either tricking you to handing it over or tricking you to not knowing you're handing it over. And one of those ways is something called phishing. And phishing is sending emails or communications that appear as if they're from a legitimate institution. Often this is in the form of a bank email or a credit card email. It's totally fraudulent, but it's been designed very carefully to look like it's from MasterCard or Bank of America. And they'll ask you questions like, what's your login information or your credentials? And you'll, of course, want to hand them over thinking it's a legitimate business, but what you're really doing is handing the keys to your financial accounts over to thieves. There's something called skimming as well. This is where a small device is often lodged or installed in an ATM machine or perhaps a gas pump, and when your card is swiped, instead of sending the data to where it's supposed to go, it sends a copy of it to a nearby identity thief. So at the end of the day, after a busy day at a gas station, the identity thief could have dozens and dozens, if not hundreds, of new credit card numbers. And oftentimes people don't pay close attention or don't recognize if they're swiping their credit card and in a hurry that there's sort of a funny looking thing between the credit card and the gas pump. Pretexting. This is another one that's growing more common as people rely on cell phones. This is where people text your telephone or try to communicate via text message. As more and more institutions rely on text communications, this is becoming more and more common. So that's another thing to look out for. Another concern is that identity thieves obtain this information nowadays, a lot of it through social media and fraudulent job applications. I know a lot of folks are, especially young folks who are maybe recent graduates or will be graduating soon, are looking for jobs, and they fill out maybe applications online, or they contact someone who may appear legitimate online and have no qualms about filling in name, address, social security number, or whatever else this job application might look like. So you have to be very mindful of just how easy it is to hand over or to give up this information and make sure that you're actually dealing with a credible source. Oftentimes, information is just as valuable as money because the identity thieves will turn around and sell your information to another identity thief, or they'll simply use your information to open new accounts or credit cards and that sort of thing. So let's talk about how to protect yourself. When you're protecting yourself sort of at home, there's some things you can do. You can opt out of some junk mail and pre-screened credit card offers, and I've outlined this information on the last page of this handout. All that opt-out information is right there. And not only will the opting out of these this junk mail and pre-screened credit card offers sort of cut down on paper use or unwanted mail, it will also sort of can cut back on the amount of sensitive information that you may be throwing away or keep in your home. Now this one I talk to people, I can't emphasize this enough. Don't give out your personal information. A lot of folks think they realize that, they know that, but they are often tricked through some of the ways I described earlier into handing out personal information over the telephone, through the mail, especially over the internet. There's someone that a story I tell sometimes is I do a lot of these talks, and I work with someone who's seen this talk maybe a handful of times, maybe 10 times, and she knows the talk as well as I do. She knows everything there is to know about identity theft. Well, one day she was home sick with her child, or her child was sick, and her phone rang, and somebody said, "This is the power company. We need you to confirm your address and social security number." She was distracted and handed it right over, thinking there was a problem, because there had been a storm in the last day or two, so she thought this is perfectly natural for someone to call and maybe check on my utilities. It turns out it was a scam. And so it just takes a moment, just takes one little lapse for you to give the keys away to your identity. Scammers also tend to follow the news. So whenever there's big stories like Obamacare or a storm or a disaster, scammers will pick up the phone, say something that sort of vaguely sounds familiar that you may have overheard on the news in the car or watching television. And so people seem to trust that for some reason. So always double check before you hand out your information. There's a category I want to talk about when you're giving out information over the phone, and that's between incoming calls and outgoing calls. If a bank or a financial institution calls you over the telephone, they'll never ask you for sensitive information. They're contacting you, they should already know who you are. However, if you're calling out to a financial institution or a utility company, they should be asking to verify your identity, because obviously you don't want your neighbor or someone across the street calling your bank and making important account changes. So just keep that distinction in mind as you answer the telephone or if people ask you serious questions. Did I make the call, or did they call me to ask for this information? Another thing you can do is buy a shredder. If that's not practical for some people, a lot of communities offer shred days. So if you want to save your important documents in a safe place in your home, you may take it to an annual shred day or find some way to safely dispose of it. But it's important to make sure that you destroy or at least separate some of these things in the mail, because as I mentioned earlier, combining credit card offers and old bank cards or medical documents or utility bills, when combined, they can offer a really complete picture of your identity or important information that one single item may not offer. Depending on your living circumstances, there's some other things that you might want to do. If you live in a community where maybe a shared mailbox or you have roommates or something, you may want to use a locking mailbox, or you may want to, some banks or some financial institutions will, if you ask, allow you to put on an additional layer of security. You can ask for counter withdrawals at in-person only or a certain password before you use a card of some sort. So you may want to just look into that if you're worried about that or if that's a concern. And finally, if you live with roommates or maybe a shared environment, if you want to buy a small personal safe to keep important documents like a passport or other medical things, something that locks to keep it off from house guests or maybe people who the information could be abused if it fell into the wrong hands. Protecting your personal information on the go. Just be mindful about what you carry in your purse or wallet. I get a lot of phone calls from young people or just busy people really who say, I lost my purse or I lost my wallet, I left it on the bus. So my first question is, okay, what was in it? I get sort of one of two responses. The first one is, I don't know. And they don't know because they're in a panic. They lost money, they lost something valuable in the bag, they can't think clearly. The second response I get from folks is, well, my 10 credit cards, my passport, my social security card, my Medicare card, they're carrying literally almost every important document they have on their person at all times. So my point here is not to leave all of this at home all the time. Of course, if you want to carry your medical card, if you're ever in an accident, you can get medical care. But maybe if you're going to a concert or maybe just down to the corner for a case of Coke, just make sure you're being mindful about what you're actually carrying on your person. Which leads me to my next point of make copies of your documents, because when you lose those documents or you lose your wallet or your purse, a lot of people are very panicked, they're very upset, especially if maybe they were mugged or robbed, or if they lost it in some sort of other anxiety-producing circumstance. They're not sure of what they lost, what numbers to call to cancel the credit card, where to get things replaced. So make a copy of all the important documents, and that way, if something ever does happen, you can go back and reference that you've canceled all of your accounts and you know which numbers to call. And of course, keep those copies in that safe you've got in your home. Now, not to repeat myself too much here, but please be mindful, be aware of who you're giving out your social security number to. Try not to give it out unless it's absolutely necessary. Unfortunately, the way the world works, in some circumstances, you are required to give out your social security number. So you have to go out there and live your life and do business, but just don't go handing it out to anyone who happens to ask over the telephone or who happens to email you telling you that you've won an international lottery or something. Just keep in mind that a very limited number of people should have access to your Social Security number. Again, be aware of email scams. I just mentioned this international lottery. People aren't ever lining up to hand out money. You're never going to find out that you won the lottery over the internet. You're never going to be emailed and asked to pay taxes on a lottery sum that you haven't seen. Scam artists, I'm sure you're all well aware of these scam tactics, but it happens, and that's why I continue to warn people about it. It only takes a moment. They can send out 100 of these emails, and 99 people will automatically dismiss them, but it only takes that one small lapse of judgment, and all of a sudden you've been scammed. Be careful about where you access sensitive information on the web. If you're using a shared computer, of course, be sure to sign out afterwards, or maybe not even, those aren't the best times to check your bank account or whatever financial accounts that you may have up. Make sure that if you're using a wireless network, I would advise against checking some of your more sensitive things. If you're maybe in an airport or a coffee shop, the sophisticated technology does exist so that people can essentially see everything that you're doing online if you are using a shared open network. I also want to talk about password security. Be sure to choose strong passwords. The definition of a strong password is, of course, changing all the time. I would also advise against using the same password and sign-in information for all of your accounts. That happens a lot. If one is hacked, then they use that password to then gain access to your eBay account, your Amazon account, your bank account, whatever else you may have out there. So just be very careful in your passwords. Choose strong passwords, and of course, don't hand out those passwords. I want to talk to you about credit cards and debit cards. They look the same. They may even have the same little logos in the corner, but they're treated very differently. Credit cards have a lot more protection than debit cards. If you have entered into a fraudulent transaction, you have up to 60 days to report that fraud, and you'll be liable for only $50. However, debit cards are treated very differently. That same $50 liability, you only have 2 days to report that once you find out about the fraud. So compare that timeline of 2 months versus 2 days. The other danger, of course, is that your debit cards may be linked to your bank accounts. By definition, they probably are. They're often linked to your checking account and perhaps even your savings account. And it's much easier to fight charges that maybe haven't gone through than it is to get money that's been zapped out of your checking account, or to get that back from overseas or from some criminal enterprise. I also want to offer a word of caution about old checks or maybe voided checks that you've got lying around. I know a lot of folks don't use checks anymore, and some younger people may not be very familiar with them. But the numbers on the bottom of the check tell a lot of information about where you bank, what your account number is, and that sort of thing. So a lot of scams happen when somebody finds maybe an old voided check or a check that's been discarded somewhere. And if they call this person whose name and address may be on the check, and they can find out exactly what bank they go to and what the account number is, that can set them up for a very targeted attack to extract money from that financial institution. So it's important also to monitor your accounts for signs of fraud. I tell folks, and I repeat this again and again, to review your credit reports. You're entitled to a couple credit reports a year. You can check from all 3 credit bureaus under federal law and under Maryland law. So if you space that out enough, or if you're truly motivated, you can check your credit report every 2 months or so, which is pretty frequent and good enough to detect a lot of problems if they ever occur. So here's the contact information. And again, that's in the handout I've given you, both in the book and the printout. So to take a step back, when you do check your credit report, look for things that you don't recognize. Look for excessive credit inquiries. Just make sure that everything that's on your credit report matches up to something that you know about or that you opened. Check your bank account, your credit cards, and your utility accounts. A lot of folks don't realize that your utility accounts can also be compromised or sometimes even abused. If a neighbor is perhaps using excessive amount of electricity, they may try to somehow run an extension cord to one of your outlets, or perhaps in an apartment living situation. I've heard of folks who have tapped into the electrical supply somehow and have been essentially getting free electricity from their neighbors. So check for strange, maybe jumps in usage or other accounts being opened in your name. It's important to check all of your accounts for strange things that you don't recognize. So, how to tell if you're a victim of identity theft? You can be getting too little mail. Bank credit card things never arrived. This means that maybe someone is physically stealing your mail right out of your mailbox or off your front, out of your mailbox. Or maybe someone has gone down to the post office and put in a change of address form. Sometimes people realize they're the target of identity theft when they get a nice postcard from the post office saying, "You've recently changed your address." And of course, that sends up all sorts of red flags. The flip side of that is if you start getting too much mail, you start getting credit card bills that aren't in your name but sound maybe familiar, or there's the right address but the wrong name. You start getting maybe packages that you didn't order, expensive electronics especially. This might mean that someone is ordering things in your name and just trying to maybe pick it up before you get home from work or school, or maybe that they've simply committed a fraud and not done it very well and had the package shipped to the wrong place. And the last thing, another sign is people contacting you or by telephone or email telling you to pay your debts, especially if you don't have any bad debts. This is a dead giveaway that you've been a victim of identity theft, perhaps even years ago, and now the bad debts have worked their way through the collection process, and people are now trying to look for you to pay those bills. So, common signs include mysterious charges on your credit card bill. This can be a one-time big charge. Maybe think, big screen TV. It's often high-end electronics like a laptop computer. It can also be sort of a low recurring charge, $1 or $2 or $3. And that doesn't sound like much, but when they do that, they're charging 50 or 60 or 70,000 people $1 a month. And that can be quite a lucrative scam because a lot of folks don't notice just $1 missing from their account each month. Again, if you recognize, if you see accounts on your credit report that you didn't open, it could be a very obvious sign that you've been a victim of identity theft. Or if you go out and you apply for a loan or a car loan or a mortgage and you're denied credit or offered very unfavorable terms, this could be a sign that maybe your credit isn't as good as you think it is, or it could be a sign that maybe someone else is abusing your good credit so that they can get goods and services without paying for them. And finally, if you're ever pulled over and despite staying out of trouble with the law, the police officer tells you that there's a warrant out for your arrest, I imagine that would wake a lot of you up very quickly to the possibility of identity theft. So now we'll talk about how to recover from identity theft. The first thing you should do is put what's called a fraud alert on your credit report. This is a good first step. It's a 90-day fraud alert that acts as sort of a red flag for creditors or lenders, so that if you or someone in your name is applying for credit, creditors or lenders should take extra steps to verify that it's actually you and not the identity thief. If you notify just one of these places that you need a fraud alert, they will alert the other two as well. Again, when I'm talking about the recovering from identity theft, we'll sort of follow the steps in this handout. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4. The next thing you should do is file a police report. And this will come in handy in later steps. But Maryland law requires that the police will both take a police report and provide you a copy of the police report. Occasionally, some police departments or police agencies are unfamiliar with the law in Maryland regarding identity theft. So I've included the relevant statute so that you can show it to the police officer and let them know what your rights that you're entitled to. And if you're still turned away, of course, please contact the Attorney General's office. We're more than happy to discuss the matter. The third thing is file a complaint with the Federal Trade Commission. The Federal Trade Commission also has a number of excellent resources. Like I said, the big publication, the big book that I handed out today was put out by the Federal Trade Commission. They know a lot about identity theft and offer very great information, so that should always be a step as well. And finally, call the Identity Theft Unit. We can provide materials, advice, or contact information. We often act as, I don't want to say tour guide, but we can help make sure that every problem you encounter, we can either solve it or make sure we can find someone who solves it for you. So finally, you're going to want to, if new accounts were opened in your name, you're going to want to dispute those fraudulent accounts by closing them, or if it's an account that you had established that was compromised, think of the Target card, for example. You want to close that account and have them reissue a new credit card or debit card. When you dispute these fraudulent accounts, you of course want to send the request in writing and keep a copy of the letter you sent. You also may want to send a copy of the police report. Most financial institutions these days are unfortunately so familiar with identity theft that now, fortunately, they have a pretty streamlined process of how to make a claim for identity theft. Oftentimes, they'll send you what's called an affidavit, and you can fill it out and submit your claim. Some of them do ask you to submit a police report as well. So when you're disputing again, to expand on disputing the fraudulent charges in writing, you're going to want to make sure that you include any relevant information in your identity theft case. That can include copies of your credit statements or your bank statements or credit card bills, that sort of thing. There's another step that's pretty Maryland specific. You can apply for what's called an identity theft passport. And this is the application requires you tell us about your identity theft, and you include a copy of your police report, and then we'll issue you a card that you can carry on your person that can be used to dispute identity theft, help prove that you're a victim of identity theft to some vendors or lenders, or creditors or lenders. Or you can also, I think it's very helpful to keep on your person if you've ever been a victim of medical or criminal identity theft, because hopefully you can convince the police officer that you're a victim of identity theft and don't deserve to spend the weekend in jail. You can get it straightened out before you end up in handcuffs. You can also freeze your credit report. Now, a freeze is different than a fraud alert. A lot of folks will sort of mix up the two terms, but it's important to note that there's a very big distinction between a fraud alert and a credit freeze, or security freeze it's sometimes called. A freeze completely blocks information on your credit report from anyone seeing it, from would-be lenders or creditors attaching new accounts to your name. To do that, you'll contact each of the 3 credit reporting agencies separately. And I've included updated information in this on how to contact the credit reporting agencies via mail, via telephone, or via the internet. Credit freeze in Maryland, the most they can charge is $5 to freeze or unfreeze your credit report. However, if you have filed a police report and you're a victim of identity theft, you're allowed to freeze the credit report for free. So again, it's important to get that police report because it comes in handy in so many steps down the road. There's something new in Maryland that's where Maryland was one of the first states to put this protection in place that allows a credit freeze for children and protected consumers. So parents, if you want to make sure that your child's identity will be, or your credit history will be safe when they turn 18, you may want to look into freezing your children's credit, and that way when they need a job or perhaps a loan or something, when they're moving out of the house, they'll have a clean history for them to go out and be in the world. I've included that information under numbers 6 and 7. There are special instructions for if you want to put a credit freeze in place for children or protected consumers. If you're a victim of medical identity theft, you're going to want to follow essentially the same steps as financial identity theft. You're going to want to file a police report, dispute the fraudulent charges in writing, of course, and you're going to want to put a fraud alert on your credit report. You're also going to want to However, the big difference in medical identity theft is that you're going to want to take a look at your medical history, or medical records. Now, unfortunately, there's no central database or central agency that has all of your medical records. So this can be quite confusing or time-consuming or possibly even frustrating as you seek to go out and clear your medical history. If the person maybe was getting prescriptions in your name, you may have to go through the pharmacy or the benefits provider. If they're obtaining medical care, you may have to go through the hospital or the doctor. You just have to sort of chase down all leads. You're going to want to put a flag on your medical records where you receive care, and make sure that you are in touch with your healthcare provider to make sure that your medical records are in fact your medical records, because you don't want to either be paying for anyone else's medical care or having their history wind up on your records. Criminal identity theft. This one's a little different as well. There's not really a clear solution to this, but you're going to want to contact the relevant law enforcement authorities in your jurisdiction. Here in Maryland, you're going to want to contact the state's attorney's office to get a letter to explain what's going on. You're going to want to explain that you're a victim of identity theft, and you're going to want to contact maybe the police department as well and work with all of the relevant law enforcement agencies to make sure that you are, in fact, recognized as a victim of identity theft rather than a criminal. So, here are some practical tips when you're recovering from identity theft. Write down all the folks that you talk to, and believe me, you will talk to a lot of folks. You're going to spend a lot of time on the telephone or writing letters. So my best advice is keep a notebook or keep a file of all the folks you talk to. Keep their phone numbers, their names, their positions, what they said, because the unfortunate truth is that victims are often repeat victims. Identity thieves will open fraudulent accounts in your name, use your identity for as long as they can, and then when they're not getting any more, they'll sell it to the next guy down the line who may do the same thing. Or oftentimes, debt collectors end up with years-old unpaid medical bills or credit card bills that were the result of identity theft. So the person has to keep disputing these charges again and again as it moves from either thief to thief or debt collector to debt collector. So keep copies of all the correspondence you receive from either the businesses or the law enforcement authorities or whatever is applicable to your situation. And again, I can't stress this enough because these problems tend to pop up a month later, a year later, or even 5 years later. So keep copies of all the problems or all of the records, even if you think the problem is solved. So we'll talk about credit monitoring and identity theft protection services. So recently, there's been a lot of things in the news about security breaches. And when that happens, oftentimes it's not just a financial account information that's breached, like a credit card number. It's often the underlying personal information, such as your name, social security number, that sort of thing. So a lot of folks are now looking into credit monitoring services. And these credit monitoring services, which is, again, something different than the fraud alert or the credit freeze. Now we're talking about a credit monitoring service. Some of them may incorporate the other two elements, but a monitoring service generally monitors whether or not someone is using your name or opening new accounts, and will contact you in the event that someone is using your name or trying to open new accounts. So my advice if you're looking into credit monitoring service is treat it like you would any other insurance or financial product. Shop carefully, compare what they actually do, look to see whether or not they've been in trouble with state or federal governments before. Make sure that you understand that there's a difference between some of these services. Some of them offer insurance to help reimburse you for your trouble, and some of them take active steps to monitor or actually protect you. So a lot of folks, this is new territory. There's a lot of strange terms being thrown around. So compare carefully what they cost, what they actually do, and how long the protection will last. Many of the services, if you think this is too confusing, or if you happen to, if you want to take an active role in your financial life, many of these services can be provided or performed for free. You can check your credit report up to 6 times a year for free, and you can put the credit freeze in place for free if you've already been a victim. Or it's the sort of low cost of $5 per credit reporting agency. However, some folks don't have the time or the mindset to keep track of all their finances. There's enough going on. So they can't afford it, and they just want to buy one of these services, and that's fine. A lot of folks do that and are very happy with the products. We don't endorse any specific company, but we just encourage consumers to do their research. In 2008, something called the Maryland Personal Information Protection Act went into effect, and that requires a couple things. It requires, when there is a security breach, it requires businesses to reach out to the Attorney General's office and notify us that there's been a security breach. And it also requires the business to reach out to the affected Maryland residents. And the letters usually contain sort of 5 different points of information. It'll tell you what happened, who the business is that had the breach. It'll contain information for the Attorney General's office and the Federal Trade Commission. And it will provide some sort of statement requiring or informing you that you can contact these places for more information on identity theft. They will also contain the contact information for the credit reporting agencies. So if you've been the victim of a security breach, which I suspect a lot of the folks who are interested in this talk may have some interest in that, what do? You follow largely the same steps, just assume that you've sort of been a victim of identity theft. Place a fraud alert. Check your credit reports. Monitor your credit reports. Close any affected accounts. Now this applies more for maybe a credit card security breach, or your bank card security breach. You will want to close out that debit card and ask for maybe a new account number. If you want to, you can freeze your credit reports. A freeze isn't perfect for everyone. If you're getting ready to maybe buy a home or take out a loan or something, if you need sort of an open line of credit, it may be better to wait until after those transactions to obtain a credit freeze. And finally, if you want some information or if you're unsure about whether or not this strange letter in the mail that you just got is actually legitimate, feel free to reach out to the Identity Theft Unit. We're more than happy to verify that, yes, in fact, the business in question did have a security breach. We post the information online, and we're happy to answer any questions about identity theft when people call in and ask. So the Identity Theft Unit, I've included all of this information again on the front page of this handout. If you get suspicious calls or emails or harassment from debt collectors and you're confused and you think you may be a victim, of course, please reach out to us. We are more than happy to hand out preventative information. I'm very happy to hand out preventative information rather than recovery information, but all the same, we're very happy to help. So here are some additional resources, the Federal Trade Commission and among others. And I just want to conclude today by talking about my goal today was to make you aware that there are problems with identity theft. I'm sure you're all aware of that already, though. There are only so many things that you can do to prevent identity theft. The things change. The tools that identity thieves use and hackers use are changing every day. The biggest thing you can do is take an active role in your financial life, monitor your bank accounts, monitor your credit reports, monitor your utility statements, because a lot of identity theft problems are not that big of a deal if they are addressed promptly. However, the longer an identity theft problem goes on, the harder it is to solve and the more problems it may cause. For example, I get a lot of very frantic calls from people who applied for a job or need a mortgage, or they need to be approved for a loan or a background check tomorrow when this problem just popped up. And I say, well, this is usually maybe a 2 or 6 or 8 week process to get this cleaned up. So there can be a real loss of an opportunity if you don't keep an active role in your financial well-being. So I will now take questions about identity theft, if anyone has any. I apologize to the folks in the live stream who can't sort of ask questions right now, but if anyone in the audience has any questions or would like me to clarify something, I'd be more than happy to. The question was checking how many times a year can you check your credit report. And people say you can check your credit report once a year. Well, that's sort of a simplification. There are 3 credit reporting agencies out there, and you are entitled under federal law to check your credit report with each of those 3 credit reporting agencies once per year. So there's 3. They don't always contain the same information, but they often are similar. And the numbers 4, 5, and 6, under Maryland law, you may check your credit report once a year from those same credit reporting agencies. So if you space those out and check Equifax in January and TransUnion in March, follow that sort of pattern, you can check them quite often from each of the credit reporting agencies. Does that answer your question? Sure. Yes. Right. Honestly, there's not much you can do to. The question was asking about credit cards that maybe leave your site when you're paying for your bill at restaurants, or these devices, the skimming devices that may be attached to a gas pump or an ATM, how to combat this. Really, the best way is, if things look very strange at the gas pump, you maybe want to take it in person or report it or something. But really, the best thing to do is monitor your credit report or your credit card statement as frequently as you can. Because nowadays, I get a lot of reports that, I don't want to say waiters, but people can just take a picture of your credit card with their smartphone, and that's sort of all it takes. And so checking your credit card statement is important. And because you have that 60-day protection, it sort of gives you a little bit of slack to check for those problems. As I mentioned before, credit card companies are now very, very familiar with identity theft, and they're getting very, very good at detecting it. This may have happened to some of you or someone you know if you've gone out of state. Your credit card company has called you and asked if you're really in Florida or really traveling to New York. Other times you may be sitting quietly at home and they ask about these purchases that you maybe made in Philadelphia or something. And you say, no, I'm here in College Park. So credit card companies are getting very good at detecting sort of unusual purchases that may be out of your typical spending pattern. So just check your statement frequently, look for strange behavior, that sort of thing. Yes, sir.
How surprised would you be if one of the credit reporting agencies were to suffer a massive, I'm sorry, let me repeat it. How surprised would you be if one of the credit reporting agencies were to suffer a massive security breach?
How surprised would I be? I guess after doing this job for a while, I've become quite cynical and just expecting the worst all the time. I hope that they don't. I truly believe that they're doing the best they can and they're on the cutting edge of this sort of thing, but it could happen, I suppose. Yes?
In the agency's process of working with me to protect me, how much of my personal information do they gather, which is in their files, which again can be taken by security breach?
Well, the question was how vulnerable is his information, or what sort of information are the credit reporting agencies dealing with when he's fixing these problems? They have extensive access to your information. After all, they're the folks who put together your credit report. So they would have access to maybe what all accounts you've opened or what other credit cards you have. I'm not sure if they have maybe your credit card numbers or routing numbers to your bank account, but they certainly have a pretty good picture of what your credit history is. I mean, that's sort of the intrinsic nature of the credit report. And of course, humans are the ones who are doing this work, so, I'm sure there's occasionally a bad actor somewhere in the process, but I strongly believe that they've got the backup procedures in place to handle this when it comes up. I don't know, to answer your question. We're all at some risk. We all have to sort of put our head down and go out there and do business in the world anyway. So again, the sort of best thing you can do is be aware and look for problems as they pop up. Oh, I'm sorry.
Can you talk a little bit more about the credit report freeze and what that really means? And for example, if you freeze the credit report for your kid, then are they authorized to unfreeze that report?
A credit freeze, the question was regarding credit freezes. A credit freeze is something that you ask to put in place through the credit reporting agencies, and they will block information from any would-be creditors or lenders. For example, if I had your name and social security number and all other relevant information, I couldn't just walk into Best Buy and open a Best Buy card in your name and then fill my truck with big screen TVs. I would have to, I would be prevented from that transaction. Alternatively, if you walked into Best Buy and you had your credit frozen, you would have to first unfreeze your credit before you could open that new credit card. And when you put the freeze in place, the credit reporting agencies will give you the instructions so that you can do one of two things when you want to open a new line of credit. You can lift it for one single transaction, or more commonly, if you're, let's say, moving homes and you need to open a cable account and a utility account and a mortgage, you can remove the freeze completely and complete your transactions and put it in place again later. And to address your question about the minor security freeze, yes, once you put the freeze in place, it will stay in place for the minor until they would have access to their credit report when they turned 18 or under some circumstances 16 or 17 with parental cooperation or something.
What do you think about the password protection applications on the internet, something like LastPass, for example? Is that a good way to store your passwords?
To be honest, I'm not that familiar with them. I personally don't use one, but I know a lot of people who do and who work in technology-related fields who really will say that they are really well made and really a good service because they provide very strong passwords and they protect it from anyone who's. I guess to answer your question, I don't have a lot to say about them, but before you use one, do your research. I personally don't use one, but I know a lot of people who do and use and are very happy with them.
Could I just follow up then? If
Sure.
you don't use one, how do you remember your passwords?
Good question. A lot of my accounts have what's called two-step verification. So if I sign into my, let's say, Facebook account, I'll get a text to my phone that says, computer XYZ just logged in to your account, could text this number to verify or something. So some accounts do allow that two-step verification. Otherwise, I don't know. I just keep good track of my passwords, and sometimes I forget them, but most of the time I manage not to.
So if you're going to allow a system to remember your password, then it's a good practice to also put in place the two-step verification?
I believe so. I think the two-step verification, a lot of websites, Gmail, I believe, has that feature. A lot of the sort of important websites will have that. For example, a lot of banking websites now don't just ask you a password. They'll ask you to sign in with your password, then enter a PIN number, and then answer some question and recognize some image. So they're putting more and more steps sort of between you and the access to the information. One other thing I tell folks, and this is sort of hard to remember sometimes, but when they ask you those questions, what's the name of your mother's grandfather, that sort of thing, you don't have to answer those honestly. If you want to say purple there, that's something that only you would know, and not someone who maybe got a good look at your social media page or Facebook page and could answer some of those questions. So those reminder questions, you don't have to necessarily tell the truth on those.
If you become 65 and over, you got to get a Medicare card. Your Medicare card requires you to put your Social Security number, which is stupid, and the federal government will tell you to carry it at all times. So what are you supposed to do about that?
Well, again, this is one of those scenarios where you just have to sort of accept the risk that's out there. I think now, I'm not sure if they're moving towards a non-Social Security number for the Medicare card, but I've heard that some of them are. Again, just it's one of those things, a risk that you might have to take if you want to follow the rules and that sort of thing, or if you want medical care if there's been an accident. Just something to be aware of if you ever do lose your wallet. Just make sure that it's not only my cards that could have been lost, but it could be giving the identity thief access to my whole financial profile. So maybe take other steps like putting in the credit freeze or whatever else. And I think that, again, I hate to say it, there are no easy answers, but part of the battle is just being aware that things could go wrong in ways that you can't necessarily predict if you lose your wallet or your Medicare card.
Yes, if one were to simply get rid of all of his charge cards and get rid of his checking account, would he dramatically reduce his risk for identity theft?
I'm not certain, and I say that because I talk to a lot of folks, older folks particularly, who say they don't trust the internet, they don't do any of this stuff, and I think it sometimes can put you at a disadvantage because you're not checking your credit card statements or you're not checking these other things, and people may still target you even if you totally avoid the internet or totally avoid credit cards and that sort of thing. It may put you in a position to not recognize when you are a victim of identity theft. So I think the spirit of your question is sort of going off the grid, and that sort of can keep you from hearing about if you are affected by some of these security breaches. For example, if you sort of go off the grid in the year 2015, but an institution that had access to your information in 2008 has been hacked and the data breach occurred, you would be at risk there. So it's really tough to have a complete security. The question was, do they ever catch the identity thieves? And to that question, I say yes, sometimes. I know the IRS every time this year puts out a big press release about how many identity thieves they've recently arrested or rounded up. And the fact that identity theft continues to grow, I'm not sure if that means people are just sort of returning to their work once they've done their prison time, or if new people are attracted to this sort of crime all the time. I do know that some people are caught, and I don't know, I certainly don't know the percentages of how many are caught or how many go back to it once they're out of jail. All righty, well, thank you very much.
Thank you.